This is my review of the DJI AIR 3. Now, I've been lucky enough to have this drone for a few months and really put it through its paces. DJI did pay me to create some of the promotional and teaser content that they're using on Instagram and on TikTok, but they did not pay me to create this video, so all of the thoughts in this review are my own. Now, I've had the opportunity to travel quite a bit with the AIR 3 in the short amount of time that I've had it. I've had the opportunity to take it to Milan for a Volvo release, and I also had the opportunity most recently to take it to Litli Hrutor, which is Iceland's newest volcano, which I thought was the ultimate test for this AIR series drone. Now, a lot of this video is going to be comparing the AIR 3 to its predecessor, the AIR 2S, because obviously this is going to be the drone that most people compare it to, wondering if it's worth the upgrade or not. And right off the bat, I will say that the AIR 3 is a lot more similar to the Mavic 3 rather than the old AIR series when it comes to picture quality, but it still maintains the old form factor where it's not as small as the minis, but it's also not as giant as the Mavic 3s. Now, if you've been following this channel for a bit, you're probably familiar with the fact that I love to use the AIR series drones when I travel, and that's just because they maintain an amazing picture quality while still having that smaller form factor and size, which really makes it easy to pack and travel with. So we're going to start off with the picture quality because the new cameras on the AIR 3 make it a real game changer and a departure from the AIR 2S. So first up, we're going to be starting off with the top camera, which is a 3x optical zoom 70mm equivalent, and the sensor size is a 1/1.3 inch stacked CMOS sensor with an aperture of f2.8. So this camera is essentially ripped off straight from the brand new Mavic 3 Pro and is that exact same 3x optical zoom. And the fact that this camera is coming to the AIR series and they're able to fit this camera size onto this body is absolutely incredible. I recently released a video or a highlight reel from Litli Hrutor, which I mentioned was Iceland's newest volcano, and a lot of the shots that I took from that video were on that 70mm lens, and that's just because it lets you get super close to the action without really risking your drone, which is why you'll notice that there's no damage to my AIR 3, nothing is melted, and the drone still looks like in perfect condition even though I had it flying next to a volcano. And for those of you who may be new to cameras, the 3x optical zoom is not as simple as just zooming in. Whenever you use a higher focal length, so 70mm for example, which is what this lens is, it actually increases compression, meaning that it makes objects look way bigger than they really are, which really brings a new form of dynamic storytelling to the AIR series drone, which wasn't present before. So you're really getting the power of something that's on the Mavic 3 Pro now on the AIR series with the exact same sensor size that's on the Mavic 3 Pro for that 3x optical zoom, which I think is absolutely incredible. And this camera has really changed my perspective on filmmaking whenever using drones, because now I just have access to a brand new lens, which I never had before on the AIR 2S. So if you're looking for a variety of shots when you're flying drones, or you're a creator that wants to have different looks to your footage, you're going to be able to get some amazing shots of portraits and people, and just getting that amazing parallax effect using that 70mm lens. It just brings in a whole new opportunity for you to film in a different way, and it's my personal favorite camera on the AIR 3. Okay, so next up, let's address the elephant in the room, which is the main camera on the DJI AIR 3. And yes, the sensor size is a 1/1.3 inch sensor, which is smaller than the DJI AIR 2S's 1-inch sensor. Now, initially I was kind of disappointed by this, but DJI put those concerns to bed really quick, so let's talk about it. The AIR 3's 1/1.3 inch sensor is a stacked CMOS sensor, whereas the sensor on the AIR 2S is not stacked. So on this camera, you have back-to-back sensors stacked next to each other, and also the aperture on this camera is at f1.7, whereas the camera's aperture on the AIR 2S is f2.8. So now you have a larger aperture and you have a stacked CMOS sensor, which creates a higher pixel density in your camera and gives you better dynamic range. So even though the sensor size on the AIR 3 is smaller than the AIR 2S, the picture quality of this camera is actually better. So you're basically getting a similar sensor to the DJI Mini 3 Pro, but stacked back to back. And these enhancements really make the camera stand out. I thought it was incredible from the get-go when I shot it, and it just looks super clean and super sharp, and it's significantly better in low light now compared to the AIR 2S. Because of the sensor's improvements, there's also a major upgrade where now on the Air 3, whenever you film in 60 frames per second, there's no crop. So if you had the Air 2S and you used to film in 60 and the sensor would crop in, that's just because the sensor wasn't able to handle that higher frame rate and it wasn't able to make full use of the sensor. With the Air 3, you can now use the entire sensor without any crop when filming in 60 frames per second. The Air 3 also introduces internal vertical mode, which is something we've never seen on a DJI drone. I don't know if I've seen it on any drone at all, but it's pretty fantastic if you use your drone for social media and you don't want to use the Mini 3 Pro. Now, the Mini 3 Pro's camera actually turns vertically, letting you shoot in that orientation. This is obviously not the case with the Air 3 because the camera unit is so large. There's no way that it would be able to turn to go completely vertical. So what DJI has done is that because they now have a stacked CMOS sensor and the length of the sensor is greater, what we would do typically in the past is that you would film your drone video as you would regularly in 4K, in that widescreen format, which we're all used to watching on TV or YouTube. You would then bring it into your editor and then you would then crop into it. However, cropping does reduce the quality. It would usually bring it down to 1080p, and that's the format that they were used to posting on social media, which is fine because generally social media taps out at 1080p anyways. So you're not really going below that quality threshold, but you're obviously lowering the quality from 4K. So what the internal vertical mode does is that it essentially uses the full length of the sensor to film a vertical output video in 2.7K because it's using the very edges of the sensor. So you do lose that information on the sides. Just keep that in mind. You're not going to get a wide and a vertical video that you can play around with. You're just going to get a vertical video. But this is awesome for those people that just buy the Air series drone for social media and they just want to post on social media. That vertical mode is going to be super handy because now you're going to get that 2.7K quality, which is literally going to be the highest quality on an Air series drone for social media that we've literally ever had. Also, with the stacked sensor and the higher pixel density, the Air 3 finally has 48 megapixel modes back when taking photos. Now, we haven't seen this mode since the Air 2, and when I had the Air 2, I used to use the 48 megapixel mode all the time, especially in daylight, just because the photos had so much detail. So the 48 megapixel mode on the Air 3 is definitely a welcomed return. Okay, so next up, let's talk about the obstacle avoidance on the DJI Air 3. So finally on the Air series, we now have 360-degree obstacle avoidance, meaning that the Air 3 can now dodge objects in any direction, including the side. So I know a lot of people crash their Air 2Ss and their Air 2s flying sideways. So hopefully this is the end of that. So the Air 3 has 4 fisheye lenses on the front, so 2 on the front, and then 2 on the back right here. And essentially both of these, or all 4 of these fisheye lenses, are able to see frontwards, backwards, upwards, and to the side. So that's how you get that 360-degree coverage, plus the sensors on the bottom, which obviously cover it from the bottom, and that's what gives you that 360-degree avoidance. So it's awesome to see this come to the Air series finally. I never personally thought that they would bring side sensors to the Air series or the Air 3, just because that's generally been reserved for the Mavic series and the Pro series. So it's awesome to see that stuff come down, because now finally we can have that Pro ability on the DJI Air 3. This also of course works with active track on as well, so it's able to lock onto a target and still dodge everything in pretty much every single direction. Next up, let's talk about flyability and battery life. Now, for those of you that know me, I love the way that the Air series drones fly, and that's mainly because they have such a cinematic and smooth flight characteristic to them. So I was kind of worried that the Air 3 wouldn't have that, just because it's taking more of that look of the Mavic 3s, but it definitely does. And I pushed this drone to the absolute limit in Iceland. When flying over Ditlihrutur, which is the new volcano. There were a ton of other drones there, so much signal interference. Also, the volcano and the lava has a ton of magnetic frequencies, which also disturbed the drone. The wind was absolutely crazy. It was freezing. I pushed it such a crazy distance, and there was never an issue with the signal or anything like that. So the Air 3 flies incredibly well. Also, in terms of the battery life for the Air 2S, we're used to getting around like 25 minutes usable of flight time, which is really amazing. And the Air 3 is rated for 46 minutes, but if you've been flying drones, you know you're almost never going to get what the manufacturer tells you. However, with the Air 3 in Iceland in these crazy conditions, I was actually getting 38 to 39 minutes per flight, which makes me think that that 46 minutes might actually be attainable on the Air 3. So I would literally send my drone up, fly around, get all my shots done, look at my controller, and I would still have 50% battery life left, literally not knowing what to do with that. So the battery life on the Air 3 is a massive upgrade over the Air 2S, and that alone for me personally is worth upgrading. Okay, so when you fold these drones down in terms of size, they're pretty similar. The Air 3 is obviously a little bit bigger, but the good news is that the Air 3 is not that much bigger, making it still really easy to travel with and put in your backpack. Now, when you open up these drones, you're gonna notice that the Air 3, just because of its longer wings and arms, takes up a lot more space than the Air 2S, which is still smaller when it's opened up. But from a portability perspective, it doesn't really matter what they're like when they're opened up. And the new design on the Air 3 with its bigger arms and longer wingspan is just to help it give it more of the flight characteristics of the Mavic 3, which helps with flight time and the ability to fly that much further. The DJI Air 3 also has a brand new controller, and it's pretty much the same as the old Smart RC. The only difference is that the antennas are now external, meaning that if you really want, you can really fine tune your connection and point the antennas where you want if you're doing super long flights, which I personally prefer having them externally rather than to having them internally, because then you can't make any changes and you're sort of just moving the controller around. So this was super helpful in Iceland when I was sending the drone long distances. But yeah, that's the new controller with the Air 3. Okay, so let's talk about some of the negatives of this drone. Now, I personally feel like there aren't many or any for me really, because this drone meets all of my needs, but let's talk about some that you may consider to be negatives. Now, if you're a sensor snob and that 1-inch sensor was really important to you on the Air 2S, yes, this is a smaller sensor size, but hopefully my explanation makes up for why this sensor is still better, even though the size is smaller. DJI is not going to make a worse camera for a newer drone in any of their lineups. That wouldn't really make sense from a business perspective. So trust me, the cameras on this drone are definitely better than the Air 2S. I've had a ton of time to test them. I've been flying the Air 2S since the day that it came out, and I can definitely vouch for the fact that the camera on the Air 3 is better. Another downside that I haven't mentioned yet is that the Air 2S could film in 5K, whereas the Air 3 cannot. So that is a smidge reduction in resolution. For me personally, I never used the 5K option. I filmed everything in 4K, so it's not an issue for me. But if you're someone that does a ton of 5K video, that might be a deal breaker for you. Now that's it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed my review of the DJI Air 3. It is my honest and sincere review. Like I said, this video was not sponsored, so all of these thoughts are my own. Hopefully you guys love the new DJI Air 3 as much as I do. Feel free to ask me any questions about it, because I've had it for a ton of time and I am an expert on the DJI Air 3 now. So feel free to reach out to me. You can send me an email, drop a comment below, send me a DM on Instagram, whatever your preferred method of communication is. However, that's it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one, and until then, keep creating.